Hello and welcome to Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast, a podcast to inspire you about outdoor travel and activities in the UK and across the world. I'm Hannah, and thanks for joining us for our latest fortnightly episode. Today, I'm really happy to be here with Jack Cornish, who is the head of paths at the Ramblers. Head of paths, I mean, that is a brilliant job title. So, hi Jack, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, yeah, no, it's the job title is probably grander than the job makes out. I don't know, but so I lead the paths team at the Ramblers, and essentially what we do as a team is support thousands of volunteers across the country and directly as a team to make sure that we've got an amazing path network for everyone to use across Great Britain.
Yeah, and that's a lot of paths to be head of. How many paths? Do you have any sort of numbers on that?
So there's about 144,000 miles of public rights of way in England and Wales, plus a slightly unknown number in Scotland, probably another 30,000 miles of paths in Scotland. So there's a lot of paths out there. And, the amazing thing about the path network that we've got across Britain is that it's not just about big signature national trails. It's about all of those little paths that are sort of hyper-local network that reaches into every community. So it could just be, a small path that crosses a field and where someone lives, or some big grand national trails in more sort of spectacular wild landscapes. So it's a massive variety of paths as well.
Yeah, we're very lucky actually in the UK to have such access to a footpath network. I think people from other countries, we have a colleague from Australia, and she was just gobsmacked when she arrived, and we went for a run at lunchtime once, and she was like, and you're just allowed to go through here. And she was really surprised that we just had that level of access. So we're incredibly lucky, aren't we?
Yeah, very much so. And I think, as you say, it's, there's different sort of types of access in different countries around the world, but with our legally recorded and protected public rights of way network, it's a relatively unique thing. And as you say, you speak to people from some countries, and the idea that you've got all of these public rights of way that 90+% of them cross private land, where you've got that sort of real solid legal protection that you have the right to be there and to use those paths. It's amazing. And I think the thing I love about the network is that it isn't, as I said, it isn't just about big waymarked trails, but it is that sort of real network and real sort of spider's web of paths that are across the whole country. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that we have a right of way through private land is it is a legally protected right of way, but it's not always been that way, and people have fought to get the access that we've got. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So public rights of way have existed as a concept for centuries, because people have always needed to go from where they live to the field, to the next village along, to the next town along. But in 1949, with the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act, that actually, for the first time in England and Wales, meant that local authorities had to proactively map and record public rights of way. And so before, it was a case of, if there was a path that people always used, a landowner could block it up, and then that individual path had to be fought on an individual case. Whereas now, the proactive recording of public rights of way, it means that it gives organisations like the Ramblers, and it gives members of the public the tools to be able to say, well, this is a public right of way, and it's always been one, and therefore, it shouldn't be blocked, it shouldn't be obstructed, it should be signposted. And so I think that sort of proactive protection is really important. Although it's worth saying that we know that, there's that legal public rights of way, but in practice, we do find too many problems on our path network. And the Ramblers, we've got a network of thousands of volunteers that scrutinise any proposed changes to those public rights of way, that lobby councils and work proactively to make sure that those public rights are open and usable for the public.
Yeah, so I went on a walk the other day, and it was a very boggy, obviously not very well used path. It was one of those, I wanted to try and do a walk and the road was closed, so I parked up near the closest footpath and just went for a bit of an experimental walk. And there was a barbed wire fence across the footpath, and the farmer sort of let me through his gate, but it wasn't a footpath route. He was just kindly letting me through this gate, because he had not so kindly put barbed wire across the access. In a very practical sense, how does the Ramblers get involved in situations like that?
In a practical sense, we are not shy about making sure that issues like that are dealt with. We would encourage that, you or a member of the public that comes across an issue to make sure the first thing to do is to report it to the local council. Every local council have a duty to protect and assert the rights of the public to use the public rights of way network. And so they should be dealing with that, and they should be informing the landowner to remove the obstruction. But the Ramblers, we know that doesn't always happen. So the Ramblers, we have volunteers that will, follow those issues through. And in some instances, we will also take legal action, either against the council in their failure to protect and assert the rights of the public, or against landowners directly, because there should be an expectation that public rights of way are open and they're usable. And, blocking a public right of way is the same. I can't block the high street round the corner from me or the road outside my house. And public rights of way are highways as much as any of those roads, and so there should be an expectation they are open and free for people to use.
I think with the Ramblers, I think a lot of people will know the Ramblers for groups of people going for walks on a weekend. Maybe there's a local group that goes on a Sunday and they do organised walks. But maybe they don't realise the breadth of the work that you do as an organisation and how much lobbying you do and stuff like that. And that you are there working for an individual path on that level. And that, if the council didn't quite get round to sorting out that fencing issue, there would be probably a volunteer that would pursue it. But as well as that, you're also going for the more broad, like protecting our rights to the countryside and the footpaths. And an example of that is the Don't Lose Your Way campaign that you've been running. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so with Don't Lose Your Way, the real issue is that, as I say, we've got this 140-odd thousand miles of public right of way, and they're all shown on what's called the definitive map. Now, there isn't one definitive map. There are, I think, 140-odd definitive maps in different councils across the country. But that is the legal record of public rights of way.
140 definitive maps. That's a contradiction in itself, surely.
They aren't definitive. They don't show all the public rights of way. So when those maps were first created in the late 40s, 50s and 60s, essentially we know that things were missed off. There were whole paths that were just not recorded as public rights of way, which should have been. And so our Don't Lose Your Way project is about identifying those paths and supporting volunteers, and that could be anyone. We don't, any member of the public who wants to help us is more than welcome to research the history of that particular path and demonstrate that it should be a public right of way. And essentially how we do that is that there's a part of English law called once a highway, always a highway. So that basically means if something was a public right of way at any point in the past, and that any point goes back to the 12th century, then it should be a public right of way now. And so volunteers comb through local archives and look at old maps and old records to build up a picture that showed that the public did use that particular path in the past. That could be on foot, that could have been on horse and cart, your horseback, etc. And if they can show there's that evidence for that public use in the path, then it should be open to the public now. So we identified a couple of years ago about 49,000 miles of potential paths that aren't recorded on that map. And so we would love people to come and now join us and look at some of those paths in their area and see how they can get involved with getting some of them back on the map so they can be legally protected and used and enjoyed for generations to come.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge, isn't it? 49,000 potentially lost paths.
It is. I mean, we know that we won't be able to save them all. There's been whole new towns created in the last 100 years, yeah. Things like that. There's reservoirs and, we found some that, were marked up, under Heathrow Airport and things like that. So we know we won't be able to save them all. And each one, require, even if it could be, put back on the map, it requires that evidence to be brought together and presented to the council to make sure it goes back on the map. And so we're focused on, the ones that will make the biggest difference to communities, so that that link up, one village to another, that resolve dead ends, that link to things like the coastal path that's being created around England and Wales. So we do want to focus on those, but it's a big task, and so we'd love any help that we can get from your listeners.
And why is there a cut-off date for that, and when is that?
Currently, there is a cut-off date of the 1st of January 2026. That was set back in the year 2000. And it was introduced at the time, even though the Ramblers weren't massively happy about it, to give certainty to landowners about what public rights of way were on their land. The government in Wales and the UK government for England have both announced their intention to get rid of that cut-off date. And we're making sure they follow through on that. And I think they're doing that partly because they can see the scale of what's missing. And actually, we can't have this arbitrary deadline for recording public rights, because adding, just even if it was 20% of those paths that are missing back to the map it would make a massive difference to how people can access the countryside and our, towns and cities and suburbs, and that's crucial for everything from the health and well-being of the country to tackling things like, the climate crisis that we've got now. But also these paths, I think it's something that's overlooked sometimes, represent a real key part of our collective heritage and history. And they're sort of, they were created by people needing to move around the landscape and people interacting with their landscapes. And so, we need to have them protected because they're part of that sort of working class history of the country that needs to be recorded and protected and enjoyed for generations to come.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, setting a deadline when you are a charity working with mostly volunteers, it's an ambitious project, but the struggles that you will face being a charity, and that, you're not going to be able to just employ teams and teams of people to go out and do all that checking for you. It's really difficult. It's an immense task. And I think when people realise a little bit more about what the Ramblers do and the benefit that they get, I think people would be very grateful, because these changes are not just benefiting Ramblers members. You don't have to donate to Ramblers. You don't have to be a member of the Ramblers to massively, massively benefit from these changes that you're doing and the walks that will be maintained. I mean, another thing that you do is the signposting and the sort of maintenance of paths. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that as well?
We've got teams that go out and they work sort of on behalf of the local authority and working with local authorities in most cases, sometimes with big landowners as well, to maintain and improve the path. So that could be really important stuff like cutting back vegetation so people can actually get through on the paths. But they also do things to make the paths better. So, for instance, we've got a team on the Isle of Wight who are just about to install their 250th gate to replace a stile. So that is making the countryside much more accessible for more people.
Fabulous.
So, we've got teams that do that all across the country that are removing barriers that shouldn't be there or don't need to be there on the network, so more people can enjoy the path network. And so they do an amazing job. And I think it's worth saying that for all of this work that our volunteers do, you don't need to be a member of the Ramblers to benefit from it, but also you don't need to be a member to join in. We'd love to have more people come and work with us and join with us on the full range of work we do to protect and expand our path network.
But if when I go walking, I've got 2 dogs, and stiles can be a huge problem because they're not on the maps, they're not marked as what type of stile they are. So, the Ramblers going and swapping out stiles for gates. On my one walk, on one day, that would make my day, that would make the difference. But again, it's one of those things that it's like nobody really knows who does it. And you don't see these big banners saying, the Ramblers have improved this path for you today. So I think a lot of the work that you do and a lot of the work that the volunteers do just goes a bit under the radar. Maybe being a member because you are a charitable organisation, maybe for everybody who went on a walk and everybody appreciated the work that you did sign up to be a member, that would have an enormous impact on the work that you could then do in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'd love anyone to become a member or to donate to us. so we can do more of this work. There's always more work to do on the path network, whether that's through the physical maintenance and improvement, but also, the network of volunteers that we've got who scrutinise every single proposed change to the network. So I think last year we had about 1,200 proposals to divert or extinguish public rights of way. And our volunteers look through every single one of those and decide whether to oppose. And then if we oppose, there's a lot of other work to come from that. And so, we would love more people to support us in any way they can. And that could be joining as a member and getting access to some of the benefits there, or monthly donation, or with time to support our volunteering. Because I think it's without the Ramblers, we wouldn't have the network we have today, and that's because of all that action that our volunteers are doing year by year, but also for our work to call for legislation. So I don't think the act that records public rights of way on those definitive maps would have happened in the first place if it wasn't for the Ramblers. The English coast path wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the Ramblers. And open access land that you get in England and Wales, and the Land Reform Act in Scotland that allows the right to roam in Scotland wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the Ramblers. So we'd love people to support us to make sure that we can do more, both on that big legislative front, but also those thousands of actions that are happening across the country to protect and safeguard the path network.
On behalf of everybody who has ever done a walk in the UK, thank you, Jack and the Ramblers, because I do think a lot of the work that the Ramblers does flies under the radar, and it is really important. And I'm sure everybody has at one time appreciated and benefited from the work that you do. Yeah, you just mentioned the England Coast Path. How have you been involved with that?
So the Ramblers were involved in the lobbying for the legislation in the first place, and it's a really, I could go on it about it for hours, but it's a really interesting piece of legislation because it doesn't just create a linear path; it creates a sort of a band of access land, which means that people have the right to access sort of to the high tide mark, so they can go down onto the beaches and things like that. But also it means that path moves if the land slips and things like that. So we were involved in lobbying and getting that legislation in the first place. And then our volunteers across England have been working on the consultations for every single stretch of coastal path. So they've been consulted and they work with Natural England and others to get the best line for that coastal path, the one that is the most the closest to the coast, the most enjoyable and the most protected. And it's been a massive amount of work they've all done, and we're coming now to the sort of last stretches that are opening, and it's going to be amazing for people to be able to walk around the whole of the coastline.
Yeah, and we had this conversation with Andrew McCloy, has written a book for Great Walks on the England Coast Path, and he was quite excited about the sort of zone of access that you've got, because then if a chunk of the path becomes unusable for any reason, you don't have to then lobby and apply for a new access around it. You can, it's that zone. So you've got that flexibility of rerouting the path if you get a high tide or if you get rockfall or something like that. So it's a massive piece of work up front, but hopefully that will limit the amount of ongoing work you'll have to do to maintain the access to that route anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think about especially the east coast of England, the rate of erosion in some places, is massive and speeding up. And so if you just had a linear path, like a normal public right of way, you can just imagine that getting breached in so many places. And then what do? You have to walk all the way back to where you started again. How do you get around that? Or maybe you have to go onto a busy road and things like that. And so the ability for the path to be able to move in line with the shifting coastline, I think, it's a really interesting piece of legislation, and I think it will really, safeguard that protection in the long term and make it a usable path. It's the longest coastal path in the world, and it's fantastic that it will be maintained and protected like that.
Yeah, it's incredible. I just can't wait to see it all opened and finished. I think it's I know that it has the opening has been delayed a little bit, but given the global events of the past couple of years, I think it's done It's done well to not be delayed more than it has. And again, that is credit mostly to the volunteers and the people out there grafting. There's just been so much work to do for it.
Definitely, and hopefully, as you say, with given the events of the past couple of years, I think it's a real, it's a good news story. That we've got these new places to walk and this protected access. So there's obviously sections that people, there's already a path there, but putting on this additional access gives extra protection to some of those paths that have long been there. And it's fantastic to be able to link up all of these places, and that you could, theoretically, you could get to your nearest bit of coast and you could just keep on walking around. And I think that's a really sort of inspiring idea. And hopefully it would just get better and better, with things like through Don't Lose Your Way and for other schemes, more linking to the coastal path and things like that, because there are quite long sections where, you go quite a long way until you can sort of get back off the coastal path and do a circular walk or something like that. It's a fantastic achievement. And as you say, it's a testament to all the work of the volunteers and also the local authorities that are in those areas and government agencies that have put a massive amount of work in over the last 10 years or so to sort of see that piece of legislation and that dream become a reality.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And then not to forget about Scotland. What's happening with your Mapping Scotland's Paths project?
Our Ramblers Scotland team are working on a project called Mapping Scotland's Path, which is about, in Scotland, you've got this amazing access, right? You've got this right of responsible access where you can, most land you can access. We identified there was a challenge with that, which is, you can access it, but how do you know where physically you can go and where the paths are, where are the routes through those landscapes? And so we've created, through Mapping Scotland's Paths, the most complete map of paths in Scotland. And it's fantastic. And if you go on the website, you can see where all of these paths are. And we've got that data from landowners, from local authorities and other organisations, and brought it together. And now we've got volunteers that are going out and, we get some information, there's a path here. Well, actually, we need to go and check it and see if it is there and what the quality of it and audit it. So, we've now got volunteers going out and doing that. And we, love more people to come and support us on that, because sometimes it can be difficult to know where to actually go on a walk in Scotland, because you have that different conception of paths and rights of way. So people can check out the map online and see what's in their local area.
So we've already talked about membership a little bit. And one of the problems, I suppose, for trying to recruit members is that people do get the benefits without being a member. So what are the specific member benefits to joining the Ramblers?
There definitely are. So if you're a member of the Ramblers, we've got an amazing walks library. So you can get on the app on your phone, you can get access to sort of walks that have been created by other members with lots of, points of interest. And so there's lots of those walks, but also you can join group walks. So I know, not always for everyone, it depends, what sort of personality you are really, but we have thousands of walks every week across the country. And again, they're led by other members. So it's a real sort of grassroots organisation. And so, you get a lot out of membership, supporting our charitable cause, but also, as I said, access to group walks. And also, if you want to go out on your own, to a whole amazing walks library and a magazine and lots of different things like that. So I would encourage anyone to become a member. It's about £35 a year, so it's not a great amount, but every single penny and pound really contributes to the work that we do to protecting public rights of way and making sure that we've got an amazing path network for the whole public.
So £35 a year is a bargain, but actually we have got a special discount at the moment. So listeners to this podcast can get 15% off your Ramblers membership. So if you're interested in that, if you head over to the offers page on the Cicerone website, it's cicerone.co.uk/offers, and you can see all the details there. I mean, I get the feeling that we could just talk for ages. It's such an important thing. Protecting people's access to the outdoors is something that I believe in really, really strongly. And like I said, everybody has benefited from the work that you do at one time or the other if they've been walking on a public footpath. So it's lovely to hear more about the work that the Ramblers do. And I hope this encourages people to get involved in some way, whether that is a one-off donation or a membership or volunteering, or even reminding me to report that problem to the local council. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to this latest episode of Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast. Let us know what you think by leaving reviews on your podcast platform or by emailing us at live@cicerone.co.uk. I'd love to hear from you. To keep up to date with the podcast, you can follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast app or provider. You can also listen on the Cicerone website, cicerone.co.uk, where you can browse our full range of guidebooks, read plenty of articles, or sign up to our newsletter. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, search for Cicerone Press on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and you can also join our Facebook community group, Cicerone Connect, to connect with other outdoor enthusiasts. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.